And welcome back, everyone, to Who Would Win. Today's Who Would Win comes to us from user-RTC30L. This was before this person's name was before I realized I could just click on the name and find out who the actual person was. Who asked the question, who would win in a fight? Dracula versus Jason Voorhees. Silence. Because he doesn't talk. So let me get it right out of the way right now. Just because that's the BC Dracula, that's just the image I had on file. We are using like the general Dracula throughout myth and movies and all that. However, I will not be using a composite Dracula, because if I were to composite Dracula from all forms of media, that would include Castlevania, and that means he shitstorms Jason. So let's make it at least a little fair here. And actually, when you take something as overpowered as a master sorcerer type Dracula out of the equation, the fight actually does become a lot more evened out. Jason is still a physical brick shit house. Even when he's human, he is still well above normal human standards for strength, durability, endurance, all that. He can rapidly regenerate from just about any wound, save like decapitation or dismemberment. He can't regenerate from that himself. And Jason actually apparently has body just regenerates, but extra limbs, things along those lines, that I believe is out of his ability to regenerate. And if we're going with like say Jason Goes to Hell, we know that he's actually there's a curse with Jason that the whole family's cursed. Regardless, though, he always he usually has a machete on call. That seems to be his go-to bread and butter weapon. He's capable of massive strength, including snapping a bed frame in two, even I think holding back a car at one point. Though I couldn't tell you exactly which one that's in. If we go Uber Jason, then Uber Jason can literally survive re-entry into a planet's atmosphere, the vacuum of space, tearing through actual like just straight, like metal walls and doorways, throwing straight out trees, like in a giant ass trees at opponents. Jason is exceptionally powerful. Jason is not infallible, though. He's been beaten, obviously, multiple times. Killed only a couple, because he's kind of the undead at this point. But Dracula is difficult to kind of pinpoint where we can look at. If we look at, like, just the standard version of Dracula, he is much stronger than a normal human. Like, we're talking like Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee kind of thing. Much stronger and generally not going to be affected by normal weaponry like guns or anything like that. Blades could hurt him to some degree, but obviously it wouldn't stake through the heart. Sunlight, garlic, crucifixes, those are the things that affect Dracula. He is able to hypnotize weaker-willed individuals. He is also able to turn into a bat or a wolf, depending on your interpretation. Should note that seeing as we're looking at the Dracula as Bela Lugosi, that particular Bram Stoker's Dracula, should also note that Gary Oldman's Dracula is that same Dracula. And if we're just looking at the standard version of Dracula, Jason's got actually a very strong edge here, because none of those versions of Dracula have really displayed enough levels of superhuman strength to overwhelm Jason in any significant capacity. I'm not saying they aren't stronger, but the level of strength they've shown is not enough to say they have a clear-cut advantage over Jason. And we're also talking about durability and endurance. Jason actually has Dracula beat, because Jason could go out in the daylight. Dracula can't do that. And Jason really doesn't tire because he doesn't need to eat, sleep, or anything. Technically, he doesn't even breathe. So, in a fight of attrition, Jason wins that because Dracula would have to actually put him down, and that's not going to be any easy task because Jason has considerable strength to combat him. Not to mention he's armed with a machete, which, not to say a machete theoretically would kill Dracula, although if he is decapitated, I don't think Dracula has any real way of coming back from that, at least from the Bram Stoker perspective of the character. So, if we're going like by just basic versions of Dracula, I would actually say it's Jason who probably would win that. However, if we were to use, and here's the thing, there's compositing Dracula from all sources minus Castlevania, because like I said, that's a shit stop. But then it all comes down to, can I find a version of Dracula that could beat him outside of the Castlevania Dracula? And the answer to that is, sadly for you Jason fans, absolutely I can. Because I could tell you 3 versions of Dracula right out of the gate that almost certainly could beat Jason. One is the Marvel Comics Dracula. Now that Dracula is still more closer to say like the Bela Lugosi one or some of the other ones. There's not a lot of like mysticism or magic, but he is far more powerful than the average human by a long margin. Now we're talking about feat strength where he can lift several tons. Him and Blade would go toe to toe. Now Blade's not that strong, but you get a point. You need fragments of, like, say, the True Cross to actually repel him. And now, granted, if he tries to bite Jason, it'd kind of be what would happen if he bit Deadpool. It's like, what? You taste sick. Because Deadpool's full of cancer. He's just a rotting corpse, Jason. And so, unless Dracula, say, were to maybe put him under hypnosis, which, to be fair, is not impossible. Jason was fooled by Freddy for a good while in the movie. So he could theoretically hypnotize Jason. I don't know that, because his version of hypnotism usually involves a look into my eyes. Like, Jason's just not going to care. So I think the Marvel version could beat him. But if you want to argue that version can't, okay, cool, fine. But then if we're talking about movie versions of Dracula, just movie versions of Dracula, there's also the Luke Evans version from Dracula Untold, who was literally firing off giant bat kamehamehas. Is a walking soldier, living soldier. Again, far superseding most normally human strength. And unlike Jason, is an actually firm warrior. Like, this guy actually lives on the battlefield kind of thing. So, I do... Now, granted, he is also not immune to sunlight, but he can actually manipulate the weather so he can still be outside. So, take that for what it's worth. But yeah, that Dracula, I think, also stands a good shot at being Jason. Although, again, not indefinite. But the two versions that I almost guarantee you could. Blade Trinity. Blade Trinity's Dracula, even though it's technically Marvel, it's not the same Dracula from the Marvel comics. Blade Trinity's Dracula is one of the only Draculas we show, except for the BBC Dracula when he realized that he could survive in sunlight. Is one of the only vampire versions of Dracula that is legitimately unaffected by sunlight. He has none of the standard vampire weaknesses. He's also a warrior, like a true warrior. Not to mention, he is much stronger than even your average vampire. Like, he's stronger arguably than Blade in just that standard Dominic Purcell, was that the actor played him? Purcell form. By the way, I love this sword, like that bone handle sword, like that. I mean, that almost not quite scimitar, but just saber blade. That was a badass looking weapon. Simplistic, but badass. But then he also has his Darth Maul Reaper transformation demon looking thing, which far superseded Blade, who's already like beyond peak human because he's got vampire DNA. At that point, you add a warrior through the ages, a monster of durability and strength, and basically a guy who Jason really doesn't have a firm way to kill him. Jason, no matter the version, except for Uber, we'll get to Uber in a second, is going to go down on that. And then finally, there is Dracula from Van Helsing, another version of Dracula whose strength far supersedes that of a normal human in just base form. It's actually unknown whether or not these vampires are actually, his brides, yes, but if he can be hurt by sunlight. We barely ever see sunlight in the movie, but we know that at least his brides disappear when the sunlight's out. I wonder if he himself is not immune as well. Either way, he also has his insane monstrous transformation, which, yeah, again, Jason would not have a firm defense against. So if we're compositing it all into one Dracula, then yes, Dracula would curb stomp Jason. However, if I'm going to composite Dracula, I should be fair and composite Jason. And if we're compositing Jason, that means we're using Deadite Jason, comic Jason, that's not a Deadite, I think they are both Deadites, but regardless, who has massive, almost Wolverine level regeneration, and Uber Jason. And, the demon thing from Jason X, I think we can just kind of throw out there, because Dracula's kind of this, is a vampire. I don't think it's really that big of an issue. But regardless, if we're throwing Uber Jason into the mix, and we're compositing Dracula versus Jason, now this is like this is a knockout knocked out bare knuckle dragon fight. These guys are going to be tossing each other around. I will say this though, in terms of area control, Dracula has the advantage because he can fly. If we're compositing Dracula, he can fly, shapeshift. So he's got that edge over Jason, which means he can just knock him around all he wants. That also means he has some level of shadow manipulation and back control, swarming Jason. But the problem immediately for Dracula now becomes the reverse of the problem for Jason. He doesn't have a good way to put down an Uber Jason. Uber Jason is far and away the most durable version of Jason. No, I'm not saying endurance. Regeneration does not count towards durability. Durability is the amount of damage you can take before you're injured. Comic Jason is more has better endurance because of his healing factor, but is not more durable than Uber Jason. Uber Jason's far more durable. But point being, again, if I'm not putting Castlevania in there, no version of Dracula has a good way of damaging or hurting Uber Jason, which now means this is just a battle of attrition until one of them tires out and figures out a way to take off the other's head. Because I would imagine that might be the only way Dracula could take down Jason at this point, is by all his strength just ripping his damn dome off. Conversely, though, that would probably be the only way Jason would be able to kind of take down Dracula, is to, take his head off. And even then, because we're compositing them together, that might not even be a firm way of taking him down. And he's immune to sunlight. Assuming maybe Jason doesn't just punch him straight through the heart and just crush the damn thing. So this really becomes a battle of attrition, and who do I think is more likely to get the win here? And I'm going to ultimately go down and bring it to Dracula, because unlike Jason, he does have the ability, if we're compositing him together, has the ability to fly, even hide in and meld in shadows, transform, has massive amounts of strength that far supersedes all the other Jasons, and probably at least is comparable to Uber Jason, even if Uber Jason is beating him out on that department. So I think it would take a lot of effort, time, and on his part, but ultimately, yes, I think Dracula would be the one to win. But I'm going to be honest, if seeing as we're compositing these characters together in this version, I'm not going to argue against someone who thinks otherwise. If someone thinks Jason could win, there's enough reason to think that. I really couldn't disagree with you on that. I would just say I feel more inclined to give it to Dracula. But this is, of course, just my opinion. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back in a little bit with a review. Until then, see you later.